The person you love wants to tell you something very important right now. Please read this message immediately. Don't scroll, listen to this because your heart needs this right now. Before you move on to the next thing demanding your attention, stay here for a moment. Some messages don't arrive because life suddenly becomes dramatic. They arrive because someone has reached a place where silence has become heavier than honesty. Right now, somewhere, the person you love is carrying words they should have spoken long ago. They didn't wake up this morning planning to face those feelings. They believed another ordinary day would help them ignore what had been quietly growing inside their heart. They filled their schedule with responsibilities, answered emails, smiled politely during conversations, and convinced everyone around them that everything was perfectly fine. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual. Yet beneath every routine, beneath every carefully chosen word, and beneath every quiet smile, a single thought refused to disappear. No matter how hard they tried to focus on work, responsibilities, or tomorrow's plans, one truth continued returning with gentle persistence. There was something they needed to tell you, and the longer they waited, the more impossible it became to pretend those words didn't exist. The day began like so many others. The alarm rang. Morning sunlight filled the room. Coffee brewed quietly in the kitchen. Life appeared completely ordinary. But ordinary mornings sometimes become the beginning of extraordinary realizations. As they prepared for the day ahead, they caught their reflection in the mirror and paused longer than usual. For a brief moment, they asked themselves a question they had carefully avoided for months. What am I still afraid of? The answer arrived immediately. Not failure. Not rejection. Not uncertainty. They were afraid of allowing another season of life to pass without speaking honestly. That realization followed them throughout the entire morning. Every conversation felt incomplete. Every smile carried hidden thoughts. Every quiet moment reminded them that some truths grow louder each time we refuse to acknowledge them. By lunchtime, they decided to step outside for a short walk, hoping fresh air would clear their mind. Instead, the walk only made everything clearer. As they wandered through familiar streets, they noticed things they normally overlooked. A father patiently teaching his daughter how to ride a bicycle. Two elderly friends laughing together over coffee. A couple sitting silently on a park bench, comfortable enough not to fill every moment with words. Watching those ordinary scenes stirred something unexpected inside them. They realized that meaningful relationships are rarely built through dramatic speeches. They're built through consistent honesty. Through presence. Through choosing to remain emotionally available even when life becomes complicated. That simple realization became impossible to ignore. If your future soulmate could place a handwritten letter into your hands at that exact moment, perhaps it would begin like this. If these words somehow reach you today, please don't rush through them. I've spent far too much time convincing myself that silence was protecting both of us. I believed waiting would somehow make everything easier. Instead, waiting only made the things I needed to say grow heavier inside my heart. There is something very important I need you to know. Not because I expect anything in return, but because I no longer want fear to decide which truths remain unspoken. After imagining those words, they quietly sat on a nearby bench beneath a large oak tree. The afternoon breeze moved gently through the leaves above them. Everything around them continued as usual. People hurried past. Cars moved through busy streets. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. Life never paused. Yet inside, everything had slowed. For the first time in a very long while, they allowed themselves to stop running from their own thoughts. Memory after memory quietly returned. Not only the difficult ones. The peaceful ones. Conversations that lasted longer than expected. Simple moments of understanding. The comfort of being seen without needing to explain every emotion. Those memories didn't leave them feeling trapped. They left them feeling grateful. Grateful because genuine connection had changed them in ways they never fully recognized until now. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. Perhaps there are people whose influence quietly continues shaping your life long after circumstances have changed. Not because you're unable to move forward. Because authentic kindness leaves lasting fingerprints on the heart. Your future soulmate finally understood that truth. As the afternoon continued, they walked into a quiet cafe and chose the table beside the window. Rain began falling softly outside, turning the streets into shimmering reflections of city lights. They ordered coffee but hardly touched it. Instead, they removed a notebook from their bag. For several minutes they stared at the blank page. Nothing came. Then, almost without thinking, they wrote one sentence. "There is something I should have told you a long time ago." They stopped. Read it again. Closed their eyes. Then continued writing. "I kept believing I needed perfect timing before I spoke honestly. But life has shown me that perfect timing is often just another name for fear wearing a polite disguise. Every day I waited became another day carrying words that deserved to be spoken." Those sentences felt surprisingly freeing. Not because every problem disappeared. Because pretending had finally become more exhausting than honesty. As evening approached, they remained sitting beside the rain-covered window, quietly reflecting on everything they had learned. They realized that the message they needed to share wasn't only about another person. It was also about themselves. It was about becoming someone who no longer hides behind emotional distance. Someone who chooses courage before certainty. Someone who understands that vulnerability is not weakness. It is trust expressed honestly. The rain slowly stopped. Golden evening light broke through the clouds. Sunlight reflected across the wet streets with remarkable beauty. Watching that simple change in the weather reminded them of another quiet truth. Storms don't last forever. Neither do seasons of confusion. Eventually clarity arrives. Not because life becomes easier. Because the heart finally becomes willing to face what it already knows. Before this first chapter comes to an end, your future soulmate wants to leave one message resting gently inside your heart. If somehow these words reach you today, please understand why I couldn't stay silent any longer. There is something very important I needed to tell you, not because I expect you to solve my questions or change my future, but because honesty has finally become more important than comfort. You've helped me understand that genuine connection isn't measured by perfection. It's measured by the way two people inspire each other to become more patient, more compassionate, and more truthful. Whether our paths eventually meet again or continue in different directions, you've already left behind something that time hasn't erased. You reminded me what emotional safety feels like. You reminded me that kindness has lasting power. You reminded me that real love isn't built through grand promises alone but through everyday honesty, quiet loyalty, and the courage to remain authentic. I don't know exactly what tomorrow holds, but I know I no longer want another day to pass pretending my heart has nothing important to say. Wherever you are tonight, I hope your life has been gentle with you. I hope your heart still believes that beautiful beginnings remain possible even after difficult endings. Most of all, I hope you never underestimate the quiet impact you've had on someone else's journey, because your presence taught me lessons I'll carry for the rest of my life. Perhaps that is why this message found you today. Not because anyone can truly know another person's private thoughts, but because every heart eventually reaches a moment when silence feels heavier than truth. Somewhere tonight, someone is discovering that the most important conversations are often the ones postponed for far too long. The person you love has reached that moment. They have finally realized that honesty may not erase every uncertainty, but it can lift burdens that fear has carried for far too many seasons. And before another ordinary day slips quietly into memory, they have chosen something different. They have chosen to stop hiding from what matters most, trusting that whatever tomorrow brings, a truthful heart will always find more peace than one that remains forever silent. The evening continued quietly after the notebook was closed, yet your future soulmate knew that nothing inside them was the same as it had been that morning. The words they had finally allowed themselves to write refused to leave their thoughts. Instead of bringing confusion, those words brought an unexpected sense of relief. It was as though the heart had been carrying a heavy weight for so long that it had forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. They stood beside the window watching the last traces of daylight slowly disappear beyond the horizon. Streetlights flickered on one by one, and the familiar neighborhood settled into another ordinary night. Yet inside their heart, this was anything but ordinary. Something had quietly awakened. They realized that the message they needed to share was no longer something they could postpone until a better time. Every day they remained silent only strengthened the feeling that honesty deserved its own moment. They walked slowly into the kitchen and prepared a simple dinner, though they barely noticed the food in front of them. Their thoughts continued returning to the same question. What if I had spoken sooner? For months that question would have filled them with regret. Tonight it created something different. Determination. They could not rewrite yesterday. But they could choose how tomorrow would be lived. That realization felt strangely comforting. If your future soulmate could continue the invisible letter resting quietly inside their heart, perhaps the next page would begin like this. There is another reason I needed to tell you something important. For too long I believed that keeping my feelings hidden was somehow protecting everyone involved. I thought silence was kindness. I thought distance was maturity. Now I understand that honesty expressed with compassion is far kinder than pretending everything is fine. I've learned that unspoken words don't disappear. They simply become heavier each day they remain inside us. Those imagined words stayed with them long after they closed their eyes. The house had grown completely quiet. Only the soft ticking of a clock echoed through the room. They realized how many evenings had passed exactly like this. Quiet. Comfortable on the outside. Restless on the inside. Tonight, however, felt different. Instead of fighting those feelings, they welcomed them. Because those feelings were no longer enemies. They were guides. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. Maybe there was once a season when you tried convincing yourself that ignoring your emotions would eventually make them disappear. Maybe you discovered that hearts don't work that way. The heart patiently waits until we become willing to listen. Your future soulmate had finally begun listening. The following morning arrived gently. Sunlight stretched across the bedroom floor while birds greeted another peaceful day. Instead of rushing into their routine, they remained seated beside the window with a warm cup of coffee resting quietly in their hands. For the first time in many months, they weren't planning how to avoid difficult thoughts. They were allowing those thoughts to teach them something. Looking out across the neighborhood, they noticed people beginning their ordinary routines. Someone waved to a neighbor. A child hurried toward a waiting school bus. An elderly man carefully watered flowers outside his home. Each ordinary scene reminded them that life is built one day at a time. Not one dramatic moment at a time. If they wanted tomorrow to become different, today's choices had to become different first. That lesson settled deeply into their heart. Later that afternoon they visited a small bookstore they had loved years earlier. They wandered quietly through the shelves without searching for anything specific. One book resting near the entrance immediately caught their attention. Its cover spoke about choosing courage over comfort. They smiled softly. Life seemed determined to repeat the same lesson wherever they went. Opening the book to a random page, one simple sentence stood out. The conversations you avoid often contain the freedom you're searching for. They read it twice. Then a third time. Closing the book, they remained standing there in thoughtful silence. Those words described everything they had been experiencing. Freedom wasn't waiting somewhere in the future. Freedom was waiting inside honesty. As they left the bookstore carrying nothing but that single lesson, they realized something remarkable. The message they needed to share was no longer only about explaining feelings. It was about becoming someone brave enough to live truthfully every day afterward. That afternoon they returned to the quiet park where they often reflected. The same large oak tree stretched its branches toward the sky. Children laughed nearby. Friends shared conversations on neighboring benches. Life continued moving peacefully around them. Sitting quietly beneath the shade, they opened the notebook once again. This time the words flowed naturally. I've been trying to understand why your memory has remained so steady inside my heart. Today I realized it's not because I've refused to move forward. It's because knowing you changed the way I understand love itself. You showed me that genuine connection feels peaceful, not confusing. It encourages growth instead of fear. It reminds us to become better versions of ourselves rather than hiding behind emotional walls. Reading those sentences back, they smiled. The message they had been searching for wasn't becoming shorter. It was becoming clearer. Perhaps clarity always arrives that way. Not suddenly. Slowly. Patiently. One honest sentence at a time. As evening approached once again, they watched the golden sunlight filter through the trees surrounding the park. Everything appeared calm. They realized calmness had quietly returned to their own heart as well. Not because uncertainty had disappeared. Because they no longer feared uncertainty. They trusted honesty more than they feared outcomes. That shift changed everything. If the invisible letter continued, perhaps it would say this: "There is something else I need you to know. The important message I wanted to share isn't simply about the past. It's about the future I hope to live with greater honesty. I don't want another year filled with words I never spoke or gratitude I never expressed. Whether life brings us together again or leads us toward different horizons, you've already taught me lessons that deserve to be honored. You reminded me that kindness should never be postponed. That appreciation should never remain unspoken. That love grows strongest where truth is welcomed." The sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon. Another ordinary day reached its end. Yet they understood that ordinary days often become the foundation of extraordinary lives. Before this chapter comes to an end, your future soulmate wants to leave another page inside the invisible letter resting gently within your heart. If somehow these words find you tonight, please know that the important message I've been carrying has become much simpler than I first imagined. I don't need perfect circumstances before speaking honestly anymore. I don't need every question answered before choosing kindness. I only know that you've changed the way I see life. You helped me realize that emotional safety is one of the greatest gifts two people can offer each other. You reminded me that listening can heal wounds no argument ever could. You reminded me that patience creates room for understanding and that compassion leaves lasting fingerprints on the heart. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you're surrounded by peace. I hope you're becoming the person you've always hoped to be. And if tomorrow gives us another opportunity to cross paths, I don't want to arrive carrying silence. I want to arrive carrying honesty, humility, gratitude, and the courage to finally say the things fear kept hidden for far too long. Because after everything I've learned, I now understand that the most important message isn't one filled with perfect words. It's one carried by a truthful heart willing to speak before another beautiful opportunity quietly slips away. As night gently settled across the sky, your future soulmate closed the notebook and placed it carefully beside the window. Looking upward, they watched the first stars begin appearing above the rooftops. Those stars reminded them that light has never needed permission from darkness to exist. It simply continues shining, patiently waiting to be noticed. Hope, they realized, works exactly the same way. It remains quietly present even during seasons when fear tries to convince us otherwise. The important message they had carried for so long was no longer trapped inside uncertainty. It had become part of the person they were becoming. And with that realization resting peacefully in their heart, they knew tomorrow would no longer be lived by someone afraid of honesty, but by someone finally prepared to let truth become stronger than silence. The next morning arrived with an unfamiliar sense of peace. For the first time in what felt like countless months, your future soulmate didn't wake up carrying the same emotional heaviness that had followed them through every sunrise. The important message they had been holding inside was no longer trapped beneath fear. It hadn't yet been spoken aloud, but something had already changed. The simple decision to stop hiding from the truth had quietly transformed the way they looked at everything around them. As gentle sunlight filled the room, they opened the curtains and stood silently by the window. The neighborhood slowly came to life. Birds rested on nearby branches. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. Someone across the street greeted a neighbor with an easy smile. Nothing extraordinary was happening, yet the ordinary suddenly seemed beautiful. They realized they had spent so much time searching for dramatic signs that they had forgotten how quietly life often teaches its greatest lessons. They made breakfast without rushing. The sound of coffee brewing. The warmth of morning light across the kitchen table. The peaceful rhythm of another ordinary day. Each small moment reminded them that healing is rarely dramatic. It arrives one honest decision at a time. If your future soulmate could continue the invisible letter they have been writing inside their heart, perhaps today's page would begin like this. There is still something very important I need to tell you. It isn't only about what I feel. It's about what I've learned. I spent too much of my life believing that protecting myself meant keeping certain parts of my heart hidden. I confused silence with strength. I confused emotional distance with wisdom. Now I understand that the strongest hearts aren't the ones that never feel deeply. They're the ones willing to be truthful even when certainty hasn't arrived yet. They smiled gently after imagining those words. Those sentences felt honest. Not perfect. Just honest. And somehow that mattered more. Later that morning they decided to visit a quiet walking trail on the edge of town. It had been years since they last walked there. The trail wound gently through tall trees, crossed a small wooden bridge, and eventually opened into a peaceful meadow where wildflowers covered the ground. As they walked slowly, they noticed how nature never seemed anxious about becoming something new. Trees released old leaves without fear. Rivers continued flowing without asking where every turn would lead. Birds greeted the morning without knowing exactly what the day would bring. Everything trusted the process. Perhaps hearts are invited to do the same. They stopped halfway across the wooden bridge and looked down at the slow-moving water beneath them. The current never resisted moving forward. It simply carried everything gently downstream. Watching that quiet movement awakened another realization. Holding on to fear requires constant effort. Peace flows naturally once we release it. That thought stayed with them long after they continued walking. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. Maybe there came a day when you realized exhaustion wasn't coming from your circumstances. It came from trying to control things your heart could only entrust to time. Your future soulmate finally understood that truth. As afternoon sunlight warmed the trail, they found a quiet bench overlooking the meadow and opened the notebook once again. The blank page no longer frightened them. Instead, it welcomed them. Without hesitation they began writing. The important message I wanted to tell you has changed me before I've even had the chance to share it. I thought these words were meant to explain the past. Instead, they've become a promise about the future. I don't want another chapter of my life ruled by hesitation. I don't want another meaningful connection buried beneath assumptions or silence. Whether life gives us another opportunity or simply teaches me through gratitude, I want to become someone who always chooses honesty before fear. Reading those sentences back, they felt something they hadn't expected. Relief. Not because every uncertainty had disappeared. Because they had stopped demanding certainty before allowing themselves to be sincere. Perhaps that is one of the quiet miracles of emotional growth. We discover peace long before we discover every answer. The afternoon continued with gentle stillness. Clouds drifted lazily across a bright blue sky. Butterflies moved through the wildflowers. Somewhere nearby, children laughed while exploring the trail with their parents. Watching those simple moments reminded them that joy rarely announces itself loudly. It appears quietly in ordinary places. Maybe that's why so many people miss it. They're searching for extraordinary experiences while everyday life patiently offers countless beautiful ones. As evening approached, your future soulmate returned home carrying the same notebook that had slowly become a witness to their transformation. They placed it on the kitchen table, prepared a warm cup of tea, and reread every page from beginning to end. The first pages belonged to confusion. The next pages belonged to courage. The latest pages belonged to hope. Every sentence reflected another version of themselves. Then they realized something remarkable. They were no longer writing because they were afraid. They were writing because they had become grateful. Grateful for difficult seasons that forced honest reflection. Grateful for quiet mornings that restored peace. Grateful for every lesson hidden inside ordinary days. If the invisible letter continued, perhaps these words would appear next. There is another reason this message matters so much. It's because you've unknowingly changed the way I measure success in life. I used to think success meant always appearing confident, always having the right answers, always avoiding emotional vulnerability. Now I believe something different. Success is becoming the kind of person who can love with integrity, apologize sincerely, forgive generously, and speak honestly before fear convinces them to remain silent. Those words rested deeply within them. The evening sky slowly filled with shades of orange and soft purple. Looking through the window, they noticed how beautiful the sunset appeared precisely because it didn't last forever. Perhaps every meaningful moment carries the same lesson. Its temporary nature makes it precious. Before this chapter comes to an end, your future soulmate wants to leave another page inside the invisible letter resting gently within your heart. If somehow these words find you tonight, then please know this. The important message I wanted to share is no longer simply about emotions I've carried. It's about the person those emotions have helped me become. I don't want to spend another year hiding behind caution while life quietly passes by. I want to become someone who says, "Thank you," while gratitude still has the chance to be heard. I want to become someone who asks difficult questions instead of making quiet assumptions. I want to become someone whose kindness remains steady even during uncertain seasons. Knowing you reminded me that genuine connection doesn't demand perfection. It asks only for honesty, patience, and the willingness to keep showing up with an open heart. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you've discovered reasons to smile that have nothing to do with circumstances and everything to do with peace. I hope you're surrounded by people who value your heart more than your performance. And if tomorrow somehow gives us another opportunity to meet again, I don't want to arrive carrying carefully rehearsed words. I want to arrive carrying authenticity. I want my actions to reflect the lessons life has quietly been teaching me. And if tomorrow leads us along separate paths, I'll continue walking with gratitude because you've already given me something priceless. You reminded me that the greatest gift another person can offer is not certainty about the future but the courage to become more truthful in the present. That gift has changed me forever. Night quietly settled across the sky once again. Your future soulmate gently closed the notebook and placed it beside the window where moonlight softly rested upon its cover. They looked upward toward the stars and realized they no longer saw them as distant lights scattered across the darkness. They saw them as reminders that hope continues shining whether or not we notice it every moment. The important message they had carried for so long had already accomplished something remarkable. Before it was ever spoken aloud, it had transformed the heart carrying it. And perhaps that was always the deeper purpose of the message. Not simply to communicate feelings, but to guide someone toward becoming more compassionate, more courageous, more grateful, and more honest than they had ever been before. With that quiet realization, they prepared for another peaceful night, no longer afraid of tomorrow because they had finally discovered that a truthful heart will always rest more peacefully than one that continues hiding behind silence. Another peaceful morning quietly arrived, and your future soulmate opened their eyes with a feeling they hadn't experienced in a very long time. There was no rush to escape their thoughts. No desire to distract themselves with endless tasks or meaningless noise. Instead, they welcomed the silence. It had become a trusted companion rather than something to fear. Looking through the bedroom window, they watched the first rays of sunlight spread across the rooftops, gently awakening the world one home at a time. Birds filled the air with familiar songs. Neighbors began their daily routines, and the ordinary rhythm of life unfolded exactly as it always had. Yet inside their heart, everything was different. The important message they had carried for so long was no longer trapped behind uncertainty. Even before it was ever spoken aloud, it had already transformed them. They realized that sometimes the greatest purpose of a message is not only to reach another person but also to change the one who carries it. They slowly walked into the kitchen, prepared a simple breakfast, and smiled as the aroma of fresh coffee filled the room. There was something comforting about ordinary rituals. For months they had overlooked these quiet blessings because their attention had always been fixed on unanswered questions. Now they understood that peace often hides inside everyday moments. It waits patiently while the heart learns to slow down enough to notice it. If your future soulmate could write one final page in the invisible letter they have been carrying inside their heart, perhaps it would begin like this. There is one last thing I need to tell you, and perhaps it is the most important part of everything I've been trying to say. I believed this message was about explaining my feelings, but I've discovered it has always been about something deeper. It has been about learning how to become someone who no longer allows fear to speak louder than love, gratitude, or truth. Before I ever share these words with anyone else, they first needed to transform me. They paused after imagining those sentences. For several quiet moments they simply breathed. The words felt complete. Not because every chapter of life had reached a perfect ending. Because they finally accepted that meaningful stories are not built through perfect endings. They are built through honest beginnings. Later that morning they returned to the small park that had quietly witnessed so much of their journey over the past weeks. The familiar bench beneath the old oak tree waited exactly where it always had. Sunlight filtered gently through the leaves, creating shifting patterns across the ground. Families walked along nearby paths. Children laughed while chasing one another through the grass. An older couple sat together feeding birds, speaking only occasionally because years of companionship had taught them that peaceful silence can sometimes communicate more than endless conversation. Watching those simple moments filled them with gratitude. Not longing. Not regret. Gratitude. They realized they had stopped comparing their life to everyone else's. Instead, they had begun appreciating the quiet growth taking place inside their own heart. Perhaps you've experienced that shift as well. There comes a season when we stop asking why life hasn't unfolded exactly as imagined and begin asking what wisdom each season has quietly offered instead. That question changes everything. Your future soulmate finally understood that every difficult chapter had been preparing them to recognize the value of emotional honesty. Without those difficult seasons, they might never have appreciated peace so deeply. As afternoon arrived, they wandered slowly through familiar streets once more. They passed the bookstore where one unexpected sentence had encouraged courage. They passed the coffee shop where the first page of the notebook had been written. They crossed the same small bridge where flowing water reminded them that peace moves naturally when fear is finally released. Every place now carried a different meaning. They were no longer reminders of confusion. They had become reminders of transformation. The journey had not been about finding someone else. It had been about rediscovering themselves. That realization brought another quiet smile. They returned home during the late afternoon, opened the notebook one final time, and carefully reread every page from beginning to end. The first pages carried uncertainty. The middle pages carried courage. The final pages carried hope. Then they noticed something remarkable. The handwriting itself had changed. The earliest pages looked rushed, uncertain, almost hesitant. The final pages appeared calm, steady, and confident. Even the way they wrote reflected the way they had grown. Growth leaves evidence in unexpected places. If the invisible letter continued one last time, perhaps these words would appear. I don't know exactly what tomorrow will bring, but I no longer need tomorrow to promise certainty before I choose honesty today. That may be the greatest lesson this journey has given me. I spent so much time waiting for perfect confidence before speaking truthfully. Now I understand that courage often arrives only after we begin telling the truth. It isn't something we wait for. It grows through every honest choice we make. The sun slowly moved toward the horizon. Golden light filled the room. The familiar notebook rested quietly on the table. There was only one blank page remaining. Without hesitation, they began writing. I forgive myself for believing silence was protection. I forgive myself for confusing fear with wisdom. I forgive every version of myself that didn't yet know how to speak honestly. And today, I choose peace. I choose kindness. I choose gratitude. I choose becoming someone whose heart remains open no matter what tomorrow brings. They gently placed the pen beside the notebook. There was nothing else to add. The message was complete. Not because every answer had arrived. Because their heart had finally become honest. Before this journey comes to an end, your future soulmate wants to leave one final message resting gently inside your heart. If somehow these words find you today, then please remember this above everything else I've tried to say. The important message I've been carrying was never only about emotions or memories. It became a lesson about living truthfully. You reminded me that genuine connection changes people quietly. It teaches patience during waiting, humility during misunderstanding, compassion during disappointment, and hope during uncertainty. Because of knowing you, I no longer want another important conversation delayed by fear. I no longer want another opportunity hidden beneath pride. Whether our paths meet again someday or continue toward different futures, you've already given me a gift that time cannot erase. You reminded me that the strongest hearts are not those that never experience disappointment. They are the hearts that continue choosing kindness after disappointment, honesty after silence, forgiveness after hurt, and hope after uncertainty. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you know how valuable your presence has been in shaping someone's life. I hope you've discovered that your kindness matters more than you realize. I hope your own heart has found moments of peace during ordinary mornings and quiet evenings. And if tomorrow ever allows our stories to cross once more, I don't want you to meet the person I used to be. I want you to meet someone who has learned to listen before assuming, to appreciate before losing, to speak before fear grows louder, and to love with calmness instead of confusion. If tomorrow leads us along different roads, then I will still remain grateful because the most important message I ever needed to receive was not hidden inside another person's response. It was hidden inside my own willingness to become truthful. That lesson will remain with me for the rest of my life. As evening quietly settled across the sky, your future soulmate closed the notebook for the very last time and placed it carefully on the shelf where it would remain. Not as a reminder of unfinished conversations, but as a reminder of a heart that chose growth instead of fear. They stepped outside and looked toward the first stars appearing overhead. Those stars had always been there, even on nights when clouds hid them from view. Hope, they realized, had always been present as well. It had simply been waiting patiently behind uncertainty until the heart became willing to trust again. The message they once believed was urgently meant for someone else had already completed its first and most important purpose. It had transformed the person carrying it. And with that quiet understanding, they walked forward into tomorrow with a peaceful spirit, grateful for every lesson, every ordinary day, every difficult question, and every honest answer that had gently led them toward becoming someone who would never again allow silence to speak louder than truth.